Hey guys, welcome to Bada Boom. I'm Chris. This is a very special day because it's a day that we're reminded that Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, is actually still happening. So I had to bring on a very special guest, my friend, your friend, Mike. What's up, Mike?
That's right. Your favorite hater is here to talk about Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, and there's plenty to hate. So, I like these kinds of episodes.
Listen, man. When I feel like there's something that I have nothing good to say about, I feel like I need to bring you on. So this is why I brought you. I actually do have some nice things to say, but overall, the sentiment of the game is not great. So what did you think of this new? It's less of a trailer and more of like a gameplay and story deep dive. I felt they should have probably led with this versus the Fortnite Destiny looter shooter thing they did in that state of play. I don't know if it was earlier this year or last year. If it feels like it was forever ago. But what did you think?
Well, they definitely took the criticism that the previous trailer brought onto them pretty seriously because they're doing everything they can to hide the live service elements of this game. Take a shot every time they say story in this trailer or characters or that kind of single player. These kinds of things. They're really trying to push that forward. And I saw a pretty funny comment in the comment section. They were saying that they're probably hiding all the live service stuff until like part 5 of this series because this is supposed to be like a multi-part series. So that's when they'll unload the dog crap on us at the end. But for now, they're really trying to to reel people in with the single player and story elements. And that's, I mean, whether or not that works is kind of dependent on how good the gameplay itself is. And from my initial impressions, it's not looking very good. My biggest issue with it is that this is supposed to be a co-op game. That's supposed to be the focus. But yet every character kind of sort of plays the same. They can all jump real high, they can shoot a gun from long range, and they all have melee attacks. And for me, a co-op game should have characters that play like radically different from one another to keep things fresh. Because supposedly this is going to be a game, because it's a live service game, this is a game that you're supposed to be playing for years on end, taking on high level dungeons and things of that nature. So if you just have 4 characters that play basically the same, like there's a little, there's, a few ability variations and things like that, but pretty much the character archetype is exactly the same across all 4 characters. I don't see that keeping things fresh in the long term, which is another reason why I think this overall should have just been like a single player experience. And maybe that's what they wanted to do at the beginning, but that's definitely not what we're getting. As to why the characters have to be the same, it's because the game can be played in single player. So you can't have any situations in which one character can't progress by themselves. So that's why all their abilities have to be more or less the same, especially in terms of the traversal. You just can't have one character that can't fly around, because that's what every character has to do in order to fight the enemies and whatnot. How that's going to affect the gameplay loop, I think it's going to do rather poorly, because these co-op games thrive on variety. Like a very popular kind of live service dungeon crawler type game is Diablo. And in that game, all of the characters, while they do kind of the same things, they all have very different abilities from each other, and you can kind of build different play styles with them. And that does not seem to be the case here. These guys just seem to be doing pretty much the same thing as all the other characters. So definitely not something that I'm interested in. I think a co-op shooter should be a co-op shooter should have as much variety between the characters as possible. Another thing I noticed as I was watching the trailer is that just like the format of the video itself, having the developers like obviously reading from a script, you can actually see their eyes going back and forth as they're reading from the teleprompter while they're pretending to talk naturally is just extremely grating for me. I've never been a fan of this format. My favorite way of presenting gameplay or even like behind the scenes stuff is to do it the Rockstar way, where you just have as much gameplay as possible and just light narration over the gameplay to explain what's happening on screen if it needs to be there. Because right now we're just, especially in this trailer, they're just pretty much describing what we're seeing on screen, so it's completely unnecessary. And you add on to that the fact that it's not genuine. Everyone's just reading from a script. So it just feels, kind of phony and overproduced. And I don't like that. I think they should have just had like a nice little gameplay segment, from the beginning, having them walking through that museum. Let the gameplay speak for itself. We don't need the devs over explaining every single aspect of the presentation. If the gameplay is good enough, people will react positively to it. I don't think that's the case here, and I think that's kind of why they're trying to oversell the game, because they don't think it stands on its own merits. So that's definitely an aspect that doesn't seem to be resonating with the audience. Because again, I was in the comments and I was looking through there, and they weren't very positive.
Good thing
In
they
terms
got
of
rid of the dislikes where you could see it. I mean,
right,
you
right.
have to
I mean,
add it, like you could find it, but
yes, the
it's not as
extension, yeah.
it's not as obvious as it
Hmm.
once
Hmm.
was.
So that's my kind of like overall thoughts. What about you? What did you think?
I felt the same way. It's funny you bring up sort of them reading off a script. I feel like because of the response to the first trailer, they really had to kind of put this game on rails and sort of give people only a peek of what's going on. Because you do get gameplay, but you don't see like any of like what the heads up display would look like. They talk about co-op, but you don't really see any cooperative play going on. You see all the different characters kind of playing throughout, but in all the footage they've shown, and I even believe from the first one, I've never seen like two of the characters fighting on screen at the same time. Now that kind of like
That's an
thinking about
excellent
it,
point. Like, what's
yeah.
the interplay between the characters? Like, do their abilities affect each other? How does that interplay work? You're absolutely right.
So I'm curious to kind of see like, even though it is supposedly two times the size of Gotham City, this new metropolis, it feels incredibly small. The way, because of the way they traverse and sort of the sameness of the gameplay.
Yeah, that's definitely because I just recently finished playing Spider-Man 2, and the traversal in that game is so good, and yet the map still feels like relatively big. Swinging from one side of the city to the other, it takes a while, and the city still manages to feel big. It's interesting that you mentioned that the city doesn't actually feel big in this game, because it certainly doesn't, especially given the purported size of it. But more important than the size of the map, it's what's on the map and what you'll actually be doing. And from everything we've seen so far, it's just, oh, you go to an area, you fight a bunch of enemies. You go to another area, you fight a bunch of enemies. It doesn't really seem like a very interesting gameplay loop. So I'd be curious to see what like the objective types are, or what you'll actually be doing other than just fighting mindless hordes of enemies that look very easy to kill. It doesn't really seem very challenging. I'll be interested to see what other enemy types there are and how they intend to make the game difficult, given just how powerful you are. And as for other little odds and ends that I've noticed that the audio mixing was like shockingly bad. The characters' lines are just overlaid over the gameplay. And what I mean by that is they're not actually in the gameplay itself. It's like the gameplay is playing in the background, and then an editor came in and just dropped a voice line in there. Kind of strange for a game that's this close to release. Another thing I noticed is that the game takes place in the Arkhamverse, but in the Arkhamverse, Batman isn't around anymore, and yet he's in this game, voiced by Kevin Conroy. So I'm guessing it's the same Batman, but how is it the same Batman? And same thing with Deadshot. He's a completely different person than he was in the Arkham games. So I don't know. It just seems like they want to have their cake and eat it too, like claim that the game is in the Arkhamverse, but it's not really in the Arkhamverse. So it's kind of like, I don't know. It just feels a little dishonest to me.
Yeah, there's some odds and ends that feel like in the Arkhamverse, like the design, obviously it's by Rocksteady, the sort of the storytelling aspects. It's good that they focused on the story, because that's the stuff that like Rocksteady is really good at, and obviously like gameplay. I do feel like it's gonna feel good when you do play it, but it's not gonna be something you'll go back to. It's gonna feel very repetitive. And like you said, they did talk about the boss fights, and I'm interested to see that, because I think that's the only element of the game that might give it some saving grace, where you're like, oh, this might feel different and interesting just based on the type of bosses you could fight, which is the Justice League. But the fact that I don't know, we've seen a lot of gameplay at this point, and all of it looks like identical.
Mhm. Very generic. Very generic. Definitely not. You should have at least shown like a snippet of a boss fight or something, just to give us a taste of what those boss fights might entail. But it's funny you mentioned that Rockstar's very good at writing stories. I'll agree, and that Arkham City had a very good story, but that one wasn't written by them. It was written by Paul Dini. And then when they decided to do Arkham Knight, they ditched him and decided to write it themselves, and it was pretty bad. So as far as like the overall writing, another thing I noticed is that it's going for like a very comedic style, kind of like what James Gunn did with the latest Suicide Squad, and what the Suicide Squad has kind of become. Like, they weren't originally supposed to be like funny, goofy characters. I've noticed that I didn't laugh at all at any of the dialogue in the game. Like, these characters, they're supposed to be making these wisecracks, and I didn't find them funny or endearing or anything like that. So I don't think it was a good idea to get the studio that made the Arkham games, which are not known for their humor pretty much at all, to try to make like a humorous game. I think that might have been a mistake. And in terms of just overall the game itself, Arkham Knight released on June 23rd, 2015. And this game is going to release on February 2nd, 2024. So that's almost a full 9 years between this and their last game. And I'm pretty sure that's going to make this, given the length of the dev cycle and just like the production values and all this stuff, and how many times the game has been like rebooted essentially through development, this might be one of the most expensive video games ever made. Unless it's able to generate GTA 5 levels of revenue, it's not going to be considered a success. And I'm pretty sure that's why the two co-founders of the studio left the studio, the thing that they created, the thing that they built from the ground up, because I'm pretty sure this is going to kill the studio. I do not see this game being a GTA 5 level of success. So instead of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, this game really should be called Warner Brothers Kills Rocksteady.
Yeah, how do they keep the lights on, working on one game for 9 years? And I know you said you're in the comment section, but comment section was literally littered with that comment. It's like 10 years it took you, and this is what you came up with. There was a really funny one, and you could tell sort of they were struggling with it. They're like, this is what you came up with. I know it's not your fault, but don't pretend we want this. And I think that's where we're at. They're forced to kind of market it and be excited, and they put a lot of work into it. But it is clear that, and this is the problem with some game development cycles. You're chasing a trend, which is a live service thing. It's been dead for years. But because they've already put in so much work and time into this game, they have to release it. So if it had come out maybe 5 years ago, maybe you'd be like, oh, I'd give it a shot. Also, you wouldn't have waited 9 years between games. So you're more willing to kind of be like, okay, like, you guys try to do something different. You guys did story driven single player. Like, all right, let's see what you could do in the co-op shooter space. Because it's been so long, and because there's sort of been a drought of really good, those games set the standard for superhero video games. And because I think everyone thought that this game would almost be like their God of War 4, that reboot. It's like you completely redefine it. You guys have been in the lab for so long. You killed your protagonist at the end of the last game, but you've done that to kind of reimagine it and all that. And I had heard that they had, or it was either them or WB Montreal, on like a Damien Batman game, which would have been really interesting considering the end of Arkham Knight. But it just sucks that this studio that sort of made their name in single player story driven video game that is iconic, not just a great superhero game, but a like all-time great video game franchise, has been relegated to this, chasing this trend that died years ago.
Yeah, and speaking of death, it's time to kill this episode. I hope you enjoyed this wonderful little conversation we had about Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. As they release the additional behind the scenes stuff for the further on in the series, we might talk about it depending on what we see, and if there's anything new in there that radically changes our opinion on it. But I wouldn't hold my breath. So that's it for me as far as what I thought about the trailer. What about you, Chris? Anything further to add?
Nothing to add. And as you said, we'll try and keep up to date with this. I think I wanted to talk about it because I was like, oh yeah, this is supposed to come out. The only thing I'll add is they were really quiet about the date throughout the trailer. It almost was like, hey, if we get bullied again, we might move this back again. I feel like when you come out with a new trailer, like the date, like, hey, we're gonna make our date this time. But yes, we'll watch the episodes. Hopefully, we get some. No one wants like a disaster. We all played those Rocksteady Batman games and felt like it took us into the world of Batman. So hopefully, it's playable. But as you said, it does not look good for this game and the studio. So tune in, guys. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And with that,
Bada
bada boom.
boom.